It is another Friday, which means it's another edition of a Mailbag Friday. Let's dive into some questions next on Locked On Royals.
You are Locked On Royals, your daily Kansas City Royals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are tuned into another edition of Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. As always, I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. That's at JOHNYJ_15. You also can find us on wherever you get your podcasts. That is Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, Google Podcast. We're on Odyssey, and we're on YouTube. Just be sure to hit the follow button and subscribe. If you are a first-time listener and want to know a little bit more about this show and myself, well, I am based here in Kansas City. I work at Sports Radio 810 WHB, do some hosting, co-hosting, and some producing. So in the day-to-day workplace, I stay pretty busy in the sports world. But when it comes to this podcast, when you click on this link, you know that you are getting 30 straight minutes of Royals baseball. And today's show is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah, the right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Check out Booking.com for your stay today. And questions and comments can always be left on our YouTube page or on my Twitter handle at JohnnyJ_15. Well, as I said, if you are that first-time listener and you've never listened to a Mailbag Friday, it's completely dedicated to the listener. You just send me your questions, and I'll answer every single one of them throughout today's episode. So let's get to question number one. It comes from Steven. Should Kyle Isbell lead off? Number two, what do you do with Lofton when Frazier comes back? And number three, do you think Hampson is worth keeping? Just started off with Kyle Isbell. I believe he's fine in the 9-hole, and I don't think that you want to put that type of pressure on Kyle Isbell. If he's hitting well in the 9 spot, I don't think there's any need to move him. I understand there's the pressures of getting a leadoff hitter on this team. I just don't think Kyle Isbell is the answer for a strong June. If you put him up there and he starts to struggle, well, then you worry about the confidence and you can shake up the lineup too much. I don't think there's a need to. If a guy like him is thriving in the 9-hole, you keep him in the 9-hole. As for Nick Lofton, when Adam Frazier comes back, I could see him being the one that's demoted, but I'd probably say that C.J. Alexander will be the one that gets demoted because Nick Lofton can play more positions and he's done more at the big league level. So that would be my prediction whenever Adam Frazier gets healthy. And number three, is Hampson worth keeping around? For the most part, or for right now, I think it does make sense to keep him around. Late in the second half, if there's a chance to add to your roster, then maybe not so much if you decide to keep Nick Lofton and Adam Frazier on the roster. But with the injuries to Adam Frazier, with Michael Massey slowly working his way back, I think it makes sense at this point in time to keep Garrett Hampson on the roster. Next question comes from Fred. Do you think that C.J. Alexander can really play at the major league level? I'm just interested in your analysis. Appreciate the question, Fred. And I don't think there's a big enough sample size at the big league level to really have a firm assessment or an accurate assessment. What I can tell you is this. He's a 27-year-old rookie. So if he does blossom, is it sustainable? Likely not, just from the track record of Major League Baseball. There's been late bloomers before, but not many. If C.J. Alexander was 22 or 23, maybe a different story, but I think you're just hoping he can give you enough until Adam Frazier's back or until you acquire somebody at the deadline or bring in somebody else. But I don't know if there's a big enough sample size right now, but from what I've seen in the first 2 games, there's a lot of holes to his game. I was hoping he was going to fare well in his debut and maybe not look as overmatched, but he looks more overmatched as a rookie than I've seen any of the rookies look in the last 3 years or so for the Royals. So tough start to his big league career. But again, it's only 2 games. I'm excited to see what he can do in the absence of Adam Frazier. This one, it comes from Gonzo. Do you think the Royals are still looking in someone like Jazz Chisholm or just fully committing to getting a couple of relievers? I don't think they're looking at somebody like Jazz Chisholm. If they do get a bat, it'll be an affordable bat, and I don't think Jazz Chisholm is affordable. I think the focus, from what J.J. Picollo has been saying on certain podcasts, is to get high-end relievers, to get back-end bullpen guys. If it works out to bring in a bat, I think he will act on it, but I don't know if the market is really that hot for a bat at this point in time. There's just not a lot of great options. Honestly, one of the better hitting options that is affordable would be Tommy Pham. I just don't know if the White Sox are going to make a deal with the Royals. But good question anyway. Mason asks, what's going on with Garcia at second? Is this a long-term move or just until Massey is healthy again? I'd imagine until Massey's healthy. Quatrero kind of went over this in a press conference, I want to say 2 days ago, that he feels like, Maikel Garcia can get some work in there. Nick Lofton's played plenty of third base, and it's to basically just give everybody an opportunity to thrive at a different position. I know that's kind of poor wording there. More so getting guys to be flexible, that you can mix and match this lineup a lot better if you have somebody like Maikel Garcia who can play third, short, and second. But I'm not a fan of the move. I think Maikel Garcia is too good at third base to put him at second base, and Nick Lofton hasn't played a ton of third base. I'd much rather just put Nick Lofton at second until Massey's back. So, yeah, I'm not on board with that decision. I don't know why they're continuing to go with it every single night. But I'd imagine when Massey is back, because Massey can only play second base, they're going to move Garcia back to third base. Next question comes from Aiden. With the offense struggling, who would you want the Royals to trade for a bat or bank on guys breaking out of a slump? So which one would I rather have? I think offensively, I'd rather just have some of these guys break out of a slump. As I mentioned in one of these other questions, I don't think many of these guys move the needle for me, or at least guys that are affordable for the Royals. Tommy Pham would be an option. I know he's not a popular choice from those that listen to my podcast or from the responses I've seen. I'm not a huge fan of Taylor Ward. I do not think anybody from Colorado is going to be a good option. I don't think there's many affordable options from the Marlins. I'm looking at Oakland. Oakland doesn't really have a guy I think the Royals can go get. I know we like J.J. Bleday. I don't see Bleday being an option. Miguel Andujar could be an option, but the sample size is so small this year, I don't think it's going to be that sustainable for him. So I'd rather see the guys break out of a slump than go empty some resources for a bat. I'd much rather focus on the bullpen market. Brian Sweeney's fan account, like the name there, asked, where is John McMillan? I haven't heard much about him, and is there any chance we see him come back to form? He would bring a lot to the pen. Yeah, he was one of my favorites going down to spring training and one of my favorites going into the year. The injury set him back a lot, though, and I don't think the velocity is there or even really close to it at this point. We've seen him sit anywhere from 90 to 93 and doesn't have great command. ERA doesn't look very good. The metrics don't look very good. The spin rate doesn't look very good. It might just be a scenario in the second half where we see him get shut down unless that velocity comes back up. It reminds me a lot of Dylan Coleman from last year. Hopefully we can see him in Kansas City at some point this year. I'm just not banking on it at this point. I don't think that he is really that close or being talked about of being close, which is a really unfortunate scenario because that injury from last year has set him back quite a ways. And hopefully he can be much healthier going into 2025. Casey Preds fan asked, why isn't Sam Long the closer? I knew that was going to pop up a few times, but I know you're being sarcastic. But the real question you have here is, are we witnessing a legit breakout from Kyle Isbell, or is this just a hot stretch? I would like to see 2 months worth, kind of in the same way I wanted to see 2 months worth from Hunter Renfroe. Kyle Isbell is so good defensively. If you can have 2 straight months of this offensively, he can be really valuable to that outfield. And I've been rooting for Kyle Isbell the majority of this year. I never really saw Drew Waters being the replacement to him. And the fact that he can do this in the 9-hole, I mean, he's hitting 230 right now, not really getting on base at a high clip. But as my good buddy Joel Penfield of One Royal Way pointed out on Twitter today, he's been really good in the month of June. And in the same way we looked at Hunter Renfroe getting hot, you kind of trust him up at the plate a little bit more. But if he can carry that into the end of July and leading up to the deadline, I think you've got something cooking there in center field. Maybe just for this year or maybe just for maybe part of next year. But I think you can just enjoy it for what Kyle Isbell is showing you right now. The defense has always been locked down there, but for the bat to come around just a little bit, it's definitely refreshing to see. Okay, we're going to take our first break of the show because we have plenty more questions to get into. So let's not waste any time. When we come back, about 10 to 15 more. And then for the third segment, probably 10 more questions to close out the show. But we'll come back and answer all of those questions next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can always find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Want to tell you about two of our sponsors, starting with our title sponsor in Booking.com. With summer travel heating up, especially travel for baseball games, it's time to explore those U.S. cities you always secretly wanted to learn about. Yes, we're talking about your rival cities. So for the Royals, it'd be the White Sox, it'd be Cleveland, it'd be Detroit, Minnesota. Maybe you're thinking about it. I know I've left Kansas City to go see a couple of road games this year, but with hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com, you might just find your perfect stay, even in your baseball's rival city. I mentioned I'm going to the All-Star game, so I'll be checking in with Booking.com to get everything covered. And it doesn't really matter if I stayed at the same place the last time or want to check out a new one. Booking.com is going to have me covered because the right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your rivals. Book today on Booking.com, on the site, or in the Booking.com app. We also want to tell you about the other sponsors today, and that would be FanDuel for our second sponsor. And you know I love sports, and I love them so much, I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like I want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel is hooking up all customers with boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. So head over to FanDuel.com/lockedon and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of Major League Baseball. And I know I said playoffs are winding down. Playoffs have already wrapped up, but baseball is still a great outlet to go and win some money. As for tonight's game, if you listened to it before, listen to Mailbag Friday before all of this, I'd maybe put some money down on Bobby Witt Jr. to go yard tonight. Maybe a Hail Mary there, but maybe it could win you some money if you take my word for it. But do so over at FanDuel. Okay, let's get into some more questions here. We're going to go right back to Twitter and hear from JC Retro Athletics. How often do you think we see CJ Alexander in the lineup? I wouldn't say every day. I wouldn't even say every other day. I think if there's a good matchup for him, which this Cleveland series doesn't really feel like it, we'll see him against a righty. I think anytime he starts against a righty and he comes up against a lefty later on in the game, he's being pinch hit for. I'm just not expecting to see him every single time out. And that should be fine because the Royals shouldn't be putting that type of heat on a rookie day in and day out. And he hasn't shown at the big league level that he can be a legitimate bat. I know it's 2 games, but the Royals are in a playoff push right now. And being in a playoff push, you need to make sure you're putting guys up there that aren't overmatched. And CJ Alexander in 2 games has looked really overmatched against pitching I didn't think was that good for the Miami Marlins. But he'll get another chance again, and hopefully we can see him get his first big league hit sometime soon. Next question, it comes from KC Superiority. Vibes are high, yes, and we have won 3 of our last 4, which is nice, but I am still worried about the offense. 2 runs per game over our last 7. What needs to change? Want to prioritize a bat at the deadline instead of a pen arm with the hopes of more like tonight and Bubic coming. More outings like tonight, I'm assuming you were meaning for the bullpen. Yeah, again, I'm going back to the market for a bat. I do not think there's somebody out there that transforms this group, and I just think they're in a rut right now. This happens in baseball. I know that we want to really hammer down on the offense, and I'm not going to sugarcoat it. It's been terrible over the last 11 games. The Royals are also 5-6 in those 11 games. You can bring up the strength of schedule there, the opponents they were facing, but they're basically playing 500 ball with their offense slumping worse than it has all season long. I'd rather focus on the bullpen because there's been a handful of games this year they've let leads slip away late. And maybe the bullpen is catching fire now, but I still want to, add to that fire. I want to find somebody or 2 guys that can really solidify the back end. If they go out there and acquire Taylor Ward or Tommy Pham, I'd be curious what they'd give up. I'm just not sure it moves the needle for me that much. But if it gets to 20 or 25 games and they're still averaging 2 runs per game over that stretch, you could be in some serious trouble there and might need to go the extra mile to bring in a bat. But right now, I still expect them to hit their way out of it. I just think their top players are slumping at the wrong time. Next question, it comes from RB Carr. Would you trade Blake Mitchell or Carter Jensen for any reliever that is available in the next month outside of Mason Miller, who the Royals likely can't afford if he were available? I am going to say no on that. I'm pretty high on Carter Jensen. Had the chance to talk with him in spring training. I think he's a really bright kid. I think he's got tremendous power. I think he has a professional approach, and he should be, heading to Double-A anytime soon. I really do think that the Royals are going to have to make a decision at some point in the next year or so, whether Blake Mitchell or Carter Jensen is the catcher of the future. And I talked to Carter Jensen in surprise about that, about being able to move around. He said, I'll play wherever they want me. So it wouldn't shock me if they move Carter Jensen to a different position, which makes me like him even more because I love the upside of him being an outfielder with that type of professional approach and the power. Blake Mitchell, I don't think there's going to be any offer on the table that the Royals would be willing to give up Blake Mitchell for. Not, after just drafting him, being so high on him. And what he's shown in year one, he's still striking out a good bit, but his on-base percentage is north of 400. He's really cut down in the swing and miss of late. But those are two guys that feel kind of untouchable for the Royals. And I don't think, with the exception of some really high-end guys like Tanner Scott of Miami, would require giving away Carter Jensen or Blake Mitchell. But good question there, RB Carr. This next one comes from Caleb Nelson. What would you think about a J.D. Martinez trade? I'd love it, but the Mets aren't going to be selling. The Mets have really gotten hot ever since Grimace threw out the first pitch. So the Mets seem to be in a mode of they're going for it. I don't think they're going to trade away their DH asset there. And, maybe it'd be the bad feelings about 2015. I don't think they'd want to help out the Royals. But J.D. Martinez is one of those bats right now that they're counting on every single day. So I don't see the Mets selling. Good thought, but the Mets are not going to be an outlet to go to acquire a bat. Next one comes from Max. He says, I saw a Royals Review article on this topic, and I thought it was interesting. It said that the Royals shouldn't buy or sell, but rather be patient and keep the assets we have. Do you agree or disagree? And if you disagree, what move would you make if you were JJ? I think if the Royals don't make any moves, they're significant moves, I think we'll see exactly what we saw in 2013 and 14. None of those clubs or front offices made a significant move at the deadline, but in 2013, they brought in Justin Maxwell. They brought in Jamie Carroll. They brought in, I'm blanking on the third one, Emilio Bonifacio. So 3 bats right there to kind of piece together a playoff push toward the end. In 2014, they brought in Scott Downs for relief. They had Carlos Peguero, I remember, a young left-handed power bat. Carlos Pena actually came in. Raul Ibanez at 42 years old was brought in. So those were a couple of moves that I think we could see from the Royals of just transactions here and there, waiver wire pickup, see if it works out. But that's what I would expect to happen if the Royals aren't buyers. I did an episode yesterday on who I think they'd go after if they do choose to quote-unquote buy. I think they've been rumored with Estevez of the Angels, Jason Adam, Tanner Scott, Michael Kopech. Those 4 guys make a lot of sense. Austin Adams as well, though he struggled for Oakland. Ursig of Oakland as well. Those 6 right there, I think, make the most sense for the Royals. And I'd imagine they're going to have the upper hand to get one of them. If they don't, though, I'd look for some of those moves comparable to what we saw back in 2013 and 2014. Joseph asks, I wish MacArthur was as good as he was tonight. Every night, such a cool closer. He's got good stuff. I think that's always been noticeable. He doesn't always have the best command. He doesn't always place it that well. But who's on the roster right now, who's in the bullpen, he is the best closer. There is no other guy I'd go to. He's got the most closing experience next to Will Smith, but Will Smith's not going to be thrust back into the closer's role. Yeah, I'm rooting for James MacArthur every single time out, and he's been pretty good over his last couple innings or couple outings or so. So maybe this is the beginning of a hot stretch that we saw kind of back in April when he took the closer's role and ran with it, then went through the rough stretch. Maybe he's going back to normal a little bit, and that would be great for not just James MacArthur, but for the Royals bullpen in general. Okay, we're going to take our final break of the show. When we come back, we'll wrap up with all the questions we have remaining in a Mailbag Friday, but want to let you know about Locked On Sports Today, a free 24/7 sports streaming channel programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories without all the screaming. Locked On Sports Today brings you can't-miss analysis, opinions, and news, streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. When we come back, we'll wrap up our Mailbag Friday next on Locked On Royals. You are tuned into Locked On Royals on the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, Jack Johnson, and you can find me on Twitter or X at JohnnyJ_15. Last shout out we have for our sponsor is Game Time. It's still the beginning parts of this homestand. Only 4 games in to the homestand, 6 more to go. You'll have all weekend to go to Cleveland, or this series against Cleveland, excuse me. And then you can also check the Royals out against Tampa Bay. But buy your tickets over at Game Time. Or if you're thinking about going to the big concert in 2 weeks here, I believe it is, or maybe it is next weekend, the Kenny Chesney concert at Arrowhead Stadium, buy your tickets at Game Time because we have a deal for you. So with Game Time, here is what you need to do. Download the app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off on your first purchase. Again, that's Locked On MLB, LOCKEDONMLB, for $20 off on that first purchase. So download Game Time today. The last-minute tickets are at the lowest price, and they are guaranteed. A great app to use when buying tickets. Well, let's see what we have left here from our mailbag. The next question comes from Michael. Who is the emergency backup catcher if Salvi and Freddie were to get injured in the same game? Remote chance, but has to be someone identified to put on the gear right. Thanks, Jack. Really appreciate your work. Thank you for the question, Michael, and thank you for the kind words. The emergency catcher is MJ Melendez. Even though he hasn't caught in quite some time, he's got the pedigree to do so. He's caught at the big league level. Yeah, if Salvi and Freddie got hurt at the same time, 2,000% it would be MJ Melendez going behind the plate. So it pays to have 3 catchers that can go behind the plate. Now, it would get interesting if MJ couldn't catch either, if he was pulled from the game earlier or something. I'd imagine it would be, there'd have to go a catching background from, their childhood. I could see Nick Lofton being able to catch because he plays so many damn positions. Maybe somebody like Garrett Hampson, but hopefully he never gets to that point, going to your 4th catcher on the roster, your 2nd emergency catcher. Jeff asked, if the Royals hold on and win, what percentage do you think we take the series? So this was for last night. Sorry about that, Jeff. So let's just assume that we can change this question to what do I think the percentages are for them to take the series, because they already took game 1. Still a really good Cleveland squad. I predict they split still. But if they win tonight, they're going to win the series, in my opinion, because it's Cole Reagans and Seth Lugo going on Saturday and Sunday. As of right now, though, I put it at 55% for them to take the series. I think it's over 50. Winning game 1 in the 4-game series is always huge. So I do think right now it is over 50%. Okay, we still got plenty more to get into, and I don't want to miss anybody's question here. John asked, what is a realistic expectation for the rest of the series after game 1? So kind of along the lines of Jeff, I'm going to say split still, but I just don't know if I could see them winning 4 straight games against Cleveland. High end, 3 of 4. Hopefully bare minimum at this point, 2 of 2. But the bare minimum is always losing the final 3 of this series against Cleveland. So I am going to say I expect a split, but I am hoping to take at bare minimum 3 out of 4 there, if you can kind of follow along with my logic there. Bobby Witt Jr.'s bat says, will the Royals sweep this series? And some other stuff maybe I would be in trouble for saying over the podcast. Yeah, along the same lines, I would give it a low percentage chance that they do sweep Cleveland. Never say never, though. Maybe you caught Cleveland at a good time and they overlooked you, and you can find a way to win 4 straight games at Kauffman Stadium. If they do, we are going to have quite a fun episode on Monday talking about this team as they barrel toward the All-Star break in a positive manner. Not going to be talking about barreling like they are limping to the finish line. They would be picking up quite a bit of steam. But that is a good and funny question there. I wish my podcast didn't have some restrictions to say that. Jackson asked, what would you prefer, a slugging corner outfielder that you can slot into the middle of the lineup, or a true leadoff hitter that is also an outfielder? I think I'd take a leadoff hitter that is an outfielder as well. That's what I think they need at the top of the lineup, to just have somebody who consistently get on base, get it to Bobby Witt Jr. and Vinny Pasquantino. I'd go a long way for this lineup. Or maybe Michael Garcia picks it up. but he's never really been a true leadoff hitter. He's just the best of what they got right now. I don't really want to move anybody else to that spot. I don't think anybody thrived when they moved Michael Garcia off the leadoff spot. So I think he's going to stay there unless they were to get a Tommy Pham. I think that would be a good example of it. Eli asked if you could have one role player, Alex Rios, Nori Aoki, Omar Infante from the 2010-2020 Royals team, who would you add? So if it's not just those three, or if it has to be a role player, I'd say draw Dyson. Man, I think Dyson would be fun to have as a defensive outfielder, defensive replacement, good speed off the bench. He'd kind of take Dairon Blanco's spot because I believe that's a true role player. Aoki and Rios both started, and Infante did as well. So I think draw Dyson, both for the clubhouse and what he could bring to the team, would be great to add to this squad. And I wish it could have ended a little differently in 2020 because they did bring back Dyson, and then eventually they had to move on from him. But back then, a 2014, 2015 Dyson would be awesome for this 2024 squad. Finn asked, how is it determined whether or not James MacArthur gets his superstar walkout? I haven't seen the walkout itself since he blew the game in Milwaukee. I've been to a lot of games since. He just hasn't come in to close. But I'd imagine he gets the say on that if he wants to have a big-time closer's entrance. If you were there last night, let me know in the comments if they gave him White Horse or Bulls on Parade, because I saw that too one night I was there. But I don't know who determines it, to be honest with you. I wish I had a better answer. Probably comes down to the players whether they want it or not, because they would be the ones to say or have a say in a song change or something like that. But I really don't know who has the end-all, be-all answer for that. Henry asks if we can somehow win this series or even sweep the Guardians. Do you think there still will be changes made sooner rather than later? I think it's going to be later than people think. I once made a prediction that by the middle of July they would have made a move. I might push that back now because, as we talked about yesterday, the National League doesn't really have 5 or 6 sellers. They have 2 sellers, and the American League has 3 sellers. We're going to have to wait a little bit longer to see who truly identifies themselves as a seller that you can go out there and talk with. You don't have to be as desperate. You don't have to reach too much. The best thing is if the Royals sweep the Guardians and take some serious momentum going into the All-Star break, that's when they could maybe start making some moves and make a strong push for the second half. But I just don't expect anything in the moment right now. I don't expect anything soon. I'd imagine it's still going to be now mid to the end of July. Could always change, though. I'll let you know if I hear anything or feel differently about something on the trade market. This one comes from John. John asks, with how good Sam Long has been, especially tonight, do you think he should be used more often in higher leverage situations no matter the matchups? I'd like to keep him to lefty-lefty. I don't think you need to overuse him. He shined last night because he faced back-to-back lefties and got it done there. That was huge for him to get out of that inning. But I would try to put him in there in another spot, maybe even tonight. Probably not tonight. He won an inning in 2/3. But on Saturday, if you need him, I would like to see him in a high leverage spot. So wouldn't be shocked to see it more moving forward because the Royals are still trying to figure out who they can trust during this bullpen hot stretch. This one comes from Jason. I was honestly going to ask about Garcia sitting out more, but he kind of shut me up. Well, it's one hit. It's good for Garcia. We need to probably see more of it going into tonight, Saturday, and Sunday. But a good start for him for sure. Matt asks how much of this for Cleveland is real and how much of it is a mirage. They've had the best possible outcomes for every player offensively while having multiple breakouts. Not a single bullpen guy struggled, and the rotation has just been good enough. When does regression hit? You never really know when regression hits. I'd expect they'll face some form of regression in July and August because they have a really tough schedule that's coming up. Maybe the time off at the All-Star break will do them more harm than good. I don't think they're a 108-win team. I think they're close to an 100-win team. But if there is regression, it'll only be slight because they are really built right now to make a push in October. Can always change because of injuries. I am worried about that rotation for them. I don't think it's that good at all. They have guys that are pitching well enough, but they don't work deep into games, and that can be problematic for them. KC Sports Fan asks, how are you worried about the Astros? Yeah, I mean, they've got that championship pedigree and can always be dangerous later on in the season. So I would say out of a scale of 1 to 10, I'm at a 7 right now for how worried I am with the Astros. Austin asked, do you think the offensive struggles we should be calling for a bit more small ball to generate some runners in scoring position. One from this game that comes to mind is in the third and Renfroe single to lead off. Isbell could have bunted him over with the top of the lineup coming up. The Royals give their green light to players to bunt unless it's a really big-time situation and it's a younger hitter up. But I think you just need to try to, keep the line moving. I don't really like giving guys a free out unless it's late in the game and it's a leadoff double and you get the guy to third and then all of a sudden a ball in the air can get somebody home. But early on in the game, I wouldn't see too much small ball. Charles asked when Massey is healthy enough to play. Second, do you think we'll send Lofton down? I'd say it'll be CJ Alexander going down because Massey's back and he's playing second base. If Frazier gets healthy, yeah, I think that'll send CJ Alexander down and then Lofton will just come off the bench for them unless I'm missing or if that's too many guys on the roster. I'm trying to speed things up here and get to the final three. This one comes from Muniuro. I believe that's how you pronounce it. Sorry if I butchered that. Looking in the future a bit, will the AL Central be this dominant and competitive next season and beyond, or was this year just a fluke? I think it was a little bit fluky. I do not believe this is a division that should put 3 teams in the playoffs every single year. And I do expect some aggression from all the 3 playoff teams right now that have one in the second half. Cleveland, maybe a little bit more. Minnesota could have some aggression because of their injuries. And the Royals will go through another rough patch as well, I'm assuming. Hopefully it just doesn't push them far out of a playoff spot. Devin asked, not sure if this has ever been brought up or answered, but do you know why the Royals have had a 3:10 start on Saturdays at home these past few weeks? Usually during the summertime, they have some afternoon Saturday games. I don't know if there's a rhyme or reason for it, but I remember last year and the year before they did that. Once school is out, a lot more afternoon Saturday games for the Royals. Not 1:10 starts, but 3:10 starts. So I've kind of been used to them the last couple of years, but I don't really know what the rhyme or reason is for it. And Jack asked, given the move to the bullpen, when is Bubic planning to return to KC? Isbell's an underrated 9-hole hitter. Should he play every day? Do you think Q's managing style of being 95% statistically driven ends up being an A+ or minus when it comes to September trying to make the playoffs? For Bubic, I'd expect sometime in the second half early on, like end of July or early August would be my guess because now he's being moved to the bullpen. As for Isbell, I think he does play for the most part every single day. Maybe he can get some more bats here and there because there's nobody else in center field I think I'd want out there at this point in time. And lastly, Q's managing style being 95% statistically driven. Yeah, I do think some matchups help that. Sometimes, though, it's trusting your gut. And I think he does manage with his gut. We just don't see it a lot because we think of him as an analytical guy. But I could see it being a plus when it comes to September and trying to get this team into the playoffs. Well, that's going to do it for another edition of a Mailbag Friday on Locked On Royals and the Locked On Podcast Network. I've been your host, Jack Johnson. One last shout out to Locked On Sports Today. It's here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV Channels app. Well, we're going to be off for the 2 days this weekend, and then we'll be back on Monday fully recapping this series against Cleveland. But until then, you take it easy, Kansas City.